Okay, so who doesn't love a good Akatsuki matchup? No one, that's who. Now, I know this verse battle has been one that's been debated on quite a lot here and there, so I feel like it's time to just go ahead and get my own thoughts on the matter out of the way and decide who I feel would win this. Interestingly enough though, even though I've never done an official Akatsuki ranking by power and skill video, in my mind, I do have these two ranked a couple spots away from each other. And the more I thought about this fight, the more I came to realize that I may actually end up switching my stance on this particular topic. And I'll get to who I have above who at the end of the video. But to go ahead and start off, we got Deidara versus Sasori, the two artists of the Akatsuki. So let's go ahead and address the elephant in the room here and go ahead and talk about the thing that most people immediately tend to point out when discussing this fight, which is of course the statement from Deidara saying that Sasori is stronger than him. Now, this might come as a surprise to some of you, but I am actually 50-50 on this particular statement, because I've heard sound arguments for both sides of this. So, on the one hand, I can see why people might think this statement is a load of crap, because obviously, Deidara was saying all this in order to get Naruto away from Kakashi, in order to make the task of capturing the Nine Tails much easier. So of course, it would make sense to say something like this in order to make Kakashi feel as though Sakura and Chio would need more backup in order to fight Sasori. This is backed up by a few statements during and after the subsequent chase with Deidara, where Deidara remarks that Naruto is not at all the problem is how to deal with Kakashi. In other words, the argument is that Deidara was just saying this to draw Kakashi away, and that the statement might not actually be true. Now, on the other side of the argument, I've heard people say that Deidara in character is one of the most prideful people in the series. So prideful, in fact, that he literally killed himself because he was so mad that he couldn't beat Sasuke. So the fact that Deidara was saying that Sasori was stronger than him, and even did so pretty casually without much reservation, speaks volumes and might depict the statement as being true. I only bring this up to say that there's really no way to determine if Deidara actually believed in the statement that he gave Kakashi about him being weaker than Sasori, or if he was just full of crap. And so for this video, I won't be taking the statement into account and just going to focus on the analysis of the battle instead. Before we get into the actual fight, I think it's fair to assume that both respective fighters are going to have a good amount of intel on each other going in. Like, I'm sure when it comes to the other members of the Akatsuki outside of each duo, they probably tend to keep their abilities a secret from one another. But when it comes to the duos themselves, I'd be hard pressed to believe they wouldn't know a good amount of intel on each other's abilities and what they can do. Whether by each of them just self-admitting what they can do, or them eventually finding out through combat with any ninja or jinchuriki they might happen to come across. So in this case, I think we can safely assume that there will be likely no surprises for Deidara or Sasori. The only thing I can remotely see as coming as a shock to anyone would be Deidara's C0 self-destruct move. Since obviously he hasn't had to do that prior to his fight with Sasuke, I'd say that's something Sasori wouldn't know about. Unless of course Deidara has told Sasori about it, which is totally possible at the same time, but it's also up in the air. Now, let's start with something that I don't think is going to play too much of a role here, so that'll make it easier just to get it out of the way, and that's taijutsu. Now, funny enough, in the third data book, it says Sasori is just barely above Deidara in terms of taijutsu, like literally 0.5. However, even though both respective fighters are limited in taijutsu feats, I'd argue that despite Deidara being lower in terms of stats, that he has more impressive feats in the series. Granted, not a whole lot, but still. To me, one of the most impressive things he does is fight against Guy's whole team with absolutely no arms and just one kunai in his mouth. Now, to be fair, Deidara wasn't exactly doing any fighting, more just blocking and dodging, and Guy and Lee both were not using any of the gates unless you want to assume they were using like the first gate or something. So on those points, this feat may not be as impressive, but I still thought it was worth bringing up, especially since Deidara was running low on Chakra and detonating clay. Now when it comes to Sasori, he doesn't really have much, if any, feats of taijutsu. I mean, yeah, his puppets are primarily used for taijutsu, I guess, but they're more specializing with weaponry and blades than actual hand-to-hand combat. And really the only time Sasori was looking like he was about to use taijutsu, he ended up getting pulled by Sakura at the last second. Not that this section really matters, since again, this probably won't be a factor until both fighters are on their last leg anyway. So let's start with Deidara's perspective from the fight first. Now, if we use the fight with Sasuke as a reference on how Deidara will progress through the fight, then he'll start with the C1 explosives. Now, I say that, but then again, he might not actually need to do that, since when he did it against Sasuke, he used C1 as a way to size him up, so to speak, which I can only assume means he wants to see how he fights from a distance and see what his abilities are firsthand. But he likely won't need to do that here, since he probably has a good idea of what Sasori is capable of. Though, he could still use the clay figures that were used at the beginning of the fight with Sasuke, in the anime at least, that were multiplying each time Sasuke cut them. Like, even though Sasuke used his substitution to avoid them, they did press him a bit and catch him off guard. So maybe Deidara might be able to do the same thing here in order to get past the Haruko shell. But Sasori also does have those needles from the Haruko shell that he can shoot from a distance to possibly make the clay figures explode prematurely before they get to him. But then again, Sasuke was cutting through them with his sword enhanced with a little bit of lightning style, and they still didn't detonate until Deidara made them do so. So it might still be possible they can get through the Haruko shell with just C1. So next we go on to C2, as in the C2 dragon and its guided missile. With this, it's kind of tricky because the only thing I can see Sasori being able to use to defend against the missiles would be the third Kazekage's Iron Sand. So obviously, therefore, he would have to summon the third Kazekage. And I actually think the sand would be strong enough to block the C2 missiles, at least for a little bit. Now, based off the pictures shown in the manga, the C2 explosion is actually pretty big. So I'm not entirely sure if Sasori can withstand it even with the Iron Sand. It's tough to say, but I can't be certain how durable the sand is against attacks that aren't lightning style based. And I have to assume that the sand is at least a little bit durable than Sasuke in his heavy days, and the C2 Dragon Missile was able to destroy one of Sasuke's Curse Mark wings with just one attack. Though Sasori could structure the sand to put up a defense that would make the C2 missiles make contact well out of range with Sasori, or Sasori could shoot an Iron Sand attack at the missile head on to avoid it making contact with Sasori on the ground. Now, the problem is, I don't know if Sasori can do this indefinitely. And I say that only because it's unclear if there's an upper limit to what the Iron Sand can withstand, lightning style attacks aside. After all, Sakura punched it one good time, and if we assume she was hitting it at full strength or very close to it, then the fact that it didn't even remotely crack or anything means that it can withstand a decent amount of damage. Now, I'm not necessarily putting Sakura's punches on the same level as C2 missile from Deidara. I mean, not until the war arc at least, when she was nuking the battlefield with just one punch like it wasn't nothing. But in this case, as far as I'm aware, the only way to get rid of the Iron Sand without any lightning style jutsu is to destroy the third Kazekage puppet, which if one punch from Sakura could get the job done, then I imagine a series of C2 explosions could do the same thing. And before I forget, I wanted to bring something up as a possibility since it did happen during the C2 section of Deidara's fight with Sasuke. We saw that the C2 dragon was capable of producing a bunch of landmines from its mouth, and while Deidara wouldn't have a partner like Toby to place them underground, we do see that Deidara can and does use clay clones in battle. So if he's able to distract Sasori enough time with a C2 missile like he did with Sasuke, he could have the clone place the landmines underground to hinder some of Sasori's movement. Now, this might not actually play a part in this fight, but I still thought it was worth mentioning. Especially if you want to assume Deidara wouldn't just have a jutsu similar to Headhunter or something to place them underground, which is totally a fair assumption. But Deidara does specialize in Earth-style jutsu, so it could be a possibility. But if the blast radius and range of the repeated C2 missiles won't be enough to destroy the third Kazekage puppet, then this will bring me to what will be Deidara's trump card in this fight, which would be C3. Now, normally it would be C4, but I think we're all under the assumption and in agreement that it likely won't work here since Sasori doesn't breathe. I mean, my best headcanon for that is that the nanobots might be able to enter the heart thing Sasori has in his chest somehow, but even that's stretching it a bit. So I think we can likely say C4 won't be used here, which again means that C3 will have to be Deidara's trump card. And I'm just gonna flat out say it, Sasori is done for. Even if we give Sasori's Iron Sand the benefit of the doubt and say that it can help mitigate some damage, the blast of the aftershock damage at bare minimum will likely still be enough to destroy him. I mean, from the looks of it, C3 was almost enough to, in theory, blow up the entire sand village, and probably would have done so had Gaara not intervened. So yeah, even if the Iron Sand could withstand that, which isn't something I'm even confident it could do, Sasori himself would likely be destroyed by any of the surrounding blasts, which of course means that Sasori won't be able to use the 100 puppets either, if Sasori is just obviously destroyed. And since he won't be using C4, that just means he has more clay to use either more C2 missiles or probably even another C3 bomb if he feels like it's necessary. So with that, we go on to what Sasori could do against Deidara, and the answer is not that much. Like, Sasori's best chance is to hit Deidara with the poison needles or shoot some poison fog in his direction and do so before Deidara takes flight. Because the second Deidara is airborne, it's a wrap. And as we established earlier, if we go off the assumption that both characters have at least a decent amount of intel on each other, then Deidara will know how Sasori uses his poison and how dangerous it is, which of course likely means Deidara won't do the same thing he did against Sasuke and test Sasori while he's on the ground for a bit at the beginning of the fight. Like, if Deidara is any kind of smart, he's gonna know his best advantage here is getting on a bird or a C2 dragon and taking flight. And then that brings me to the subject of speed, as that's probably going to determine if Sasori can do so before Deidara takes flight. And as it stands, we have more feats and better feats for Deidara than we do for Sasori. Not that it's necessarily Sasori's fault, mind you, as Deidara just happens to have more screen time than he does, but even so, the points still stand. For starters, Edo Deidara was able to keep up with Onuki in the battle in the sky, and what makes that even better for Deidara's case is that the Edos scale lower physically to their alive counterparts, meaning a live Deidara should technically be faster than what was shown while he was an Edo, even if only by a little bit. Second, we have Deidara being able to keep up with and beat Gaara in a similar battle in the sky. And while Deidara did get caught and his arm taken off, it's still impressive considering that he was able to keep up with Gaara's sand at all, as Gaara's sand would later go on to intercept and attack the Raikage and block Sasuke's Inton shots with it. Now you could make the argument that Gaara is a bit weaker in the Kage Summit than his beginning of Shippuden counterpart since he doesn't have Shikaku anymore, though I am still willing to believe that Gaara and the Kage Summit might still be in the same strength or even stronger due to some training or possible mental amp due to not having to deal with Shikaku depriving him of sleep. It's up to interpretation. In any case, moving on to Deidara. Next, we have Deidara being able to avoid a straight blitz attempt from Heavy Sasuke, who had Orochimaru absorbed by this point. And when it comes to the speed of Sasori's attacks, we see that even Sakura was able to react to his attacks at least a couple times. Now, I know there was a period of time where Chiyo was controlling Sakura, so it's not entirely fair to claim that Sakura was fast enough to avoid all of Sasori's attacks. However, there is a point and a panel where it's implied Sakura dodged the Iron Sand on her own. And Chiyo right after this says that Sakura was starting to read Sasori's movements better and better, and that Sakura actually doesn't need Chiyo's support. And of course by support she means the chakra strings that were guiding Sakura. Sasori himself even says that Sakura is like a hawk now. Not to mention that Sakura was also able to react to Sasori sending the Kazekage puppet towards her, and did so while she was face down on the ground and still had enough time to react and destroy it. And this Sakura would later go on to get blitzed by a weaker version of Sasuke that Deidara avoided a blitz attempt from. So from what it seems like, Deidara holds the edge in terms of speed. And again, with prior knowledge of Sasori and his poison, he's likely not going to waste time getting airborne. Now don't get me wrong, if Sasori is able to catch Deidara with even just a little bit of his poison, then he's likely done for. Because even with just a little bit of the poison in her system, Sakura noticed that it was messing with her chakra. Of course, implying that she may not have been able to use it to be able to focus her chakra in order to use her overwhelming strength. So if it's the same case here, that it might mess with Deidara's chakra to the point where he can't use his clay, which would give Sasori an opening to land a lethal attack. Now there is something I want to mention here, and that's Deidara's composure. So the data book states that Heavy Sasuke's power exceeds the power of the Akatsuki, and I think we can assume it more than likely means the members outside of the big three, and mostly Kisame too. And whether you believe Heavy Sasuke is above or below Sasori, if we say at bare minimum they're comparable to each other, then the fact that Deidara did so well against Heavy Sasuke while also losing his cool as the fight went on speaks volume. Because by contrast, his fight with Gaara went a lot better as he had a much more calm demeanor throughout the fight and performed much better, aside from losing his arm. And the series seems to imply that Deidara only really loses his cool when he's fighting in Uchiha, specifically Sasuke and or Itachi. So it's possible that Deidara might not have the same hot-headed temper as he did with Sasuke. Unless, of course, you can say that Sasori plays on Deidara's vanity or something and start to say something about his art, which would, make Deidara mad, of course, or something like that. Either way, I could see that happening. But if Deidara is able to keep his composure, then I think it's even worse for Sasori. Now, bringing it right back around to the Akatsuki ranking that I mentioned in the beginning of the video, initially, I had Deidara at number 7 and Sasori at either number 6 or 5. And I was leaning more towards 5, but now the more I thought about it, the more I might have to switch around their placements and have Sasori at number 7 and Deidara at number 5. But when it comes to the video, I will say that it's very, very, very tricky, but I will probably give this one to Deidara like 7 out of 10 times. Again, if Sasori is able to get Deidara with just a little bit of his poison, it's probably going to win him the fight. At bare minimum, it might end in a draw at that point, because if Deidara knows he's caught with the poison and doesn't have any antidote, he's likely just going to go through it and just do a C0 explosion and self-destruct, which I can't see Sasori avoiding. So it's probably going to end in a draw at bare minimum. But I think Deidara holds the edge overall. But there's the video. Hope y'all did enjoy. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click the bell for more notifications. And until my next one, like the snow, out.